I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Katrina Menzigian, Vice President, leads the firm's Analyst Relations Program. In her current role, Katrina is responsible for building value-driven and mutually impactful relationships with the analyst relations contacts at service and tech provider organizations in the marketplace. Rajesh Randran, Partner, leads Everest Group's Business Process Services syndicated and advisory practice globally. He is responsible for the overall growth of the practice in terms of revenues, client relationship management, market influence, and talent mentoring. Alicia Mittal is a vice president in the IT services team at Everest Group and leads the application services practice. She assists clients on topics relating to digital transformation, applications modernization, automation, and related technologies. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Katrina.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. This is our second annual Analyst Relations webinar, and it looks like the start of an ongoing tradition. I wish you all success in your personal and professional lives in 2024. And so it's always fun for me to be the first webinar on behalf of the firm to welcome all of our audience, invitees and participants. Today's webinar is designed to help give AR professionals a recap of what we saw happening in 2023, and then to look at what we expect to happen in 2024 from a market standpoint. And then the third part of our webinar will look at what it is that we think AR teams need to be thinking about in planning their efforts to support the realities that their business and sales stakeholders are going to be facing in the next 12 months. So we've received a lot of really good questions at in the registration process. And so we're going to try and cover many of those through the content of our webinar today. We encourage you to also use the Q&A function to send questions as they come up during the course of our discussion for the next hour. And certainly we'll either answer them while we can today or follow up with you later on if that's more appropriate. So as I mentioned, our plan for the day is to look at how did 2023 wrap up and what's the sentiment in the marketplace at the start of 2024. What do we think are the key trends that will shape the IT and business process services markets going forward? And then what does that mean for you and your teams? So with that, let me kick off the conversation with that section on the sort of market sentiment. Now, one of the things I should mention is that we conduct an annual enterprise survey, and a lot of the findings from that survey you'll see reflected in our findings or what we share with you today. Those findings from the survey are also combined with our ongoing interactions with enterprises as well as service and technology providers in the marketplace. So it's a summary of various inputs. The kinds of things we've tackled in those, what we call our key issues survey, are captured here on the right side of your screen, but they have to do with companies' sentiments about where their businesses are today, where they see it going forward, what are the influences from technology to geopolitics that they're expecting to have to respond to, and what is the experience that these companies are having in the marketplace with their partners and with their technology vendors and so forth. So we actually had a full 1-hour webinar just on the readout from this survey, where some of the things you hear today were actually covered in more in depth. And both Rajesh and Alicia were part of that webinar. It happened on December 12th. And if you'd like to hear that webinar replay, we have a link here that you can use to access that. So with that, let me move forward and tell you a little bit about sort of how did 2023 wrap up. We had asked the question at the end of 2022, how did enterprises expect their year to go? And it looks like, and this is a kind of a shout out to John Rockhold over at Spotlight, who asked, how did predictions from a year ago come into fruition as the calendar year unrolled? So we found that companies anticipated having about a good to better than expected year. And as it turns out, that's what happened, right? So companies came into 2023 a little cautious, a little anticipatory, and the year kind of met that expectation. Luckily, those that claimed that it was a tough year was not as pronounced as those that felt that it was either expected or even better than expected in terms of business outcomes. So the sentiment wrapping up 2023 was pretty good. But if we look forward to 2024, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. And we asked them, like, what influences will be affecting what factors will be influencing their business. We find that the global dynamics are creating some anxiety out there, the macroeconomic issues that we're facing across geographies of the world. And of course, we continue to have some very hot and crisis oriented geopolitical issues going on. And so those are seen as negative influences on business outcomes for 24. But to balance that out, we're finding that positive influences are perceived to be coming from the interests and the behaviors of customers in the marketplace, so the customers of enterprises that we all interact with, as well as the adoption of new technologies. And I don't have to use the G word here, but we all know what that's talking about. And you will hear us covering Gen AI throughout the course of the conversation, but technologies of that nature are creating positive expectations in the marketplace. So with that, let's transition over to what we think are the trends that are going to shape the markets. Let's take a forward-looking view. So one of the first items that our team kind of identified as a forecast for 2024 is around this concept of doing more with less. And we all know that phrase, but it always takes on different connotations depending on the context. And by the way, that word context is one you're going to hear me talk a lot about throughout the course of our presentation today, because we at Everest Group believe we can conduct research and collect facts and figures, but what really matters is how that information reflects what is happening in the context of your business, right? And your particular company or the enterprise that you're dealing with. So it's always about pairing information with context and perspective. So getting back to our point here about doing more with less, I was going to ask Rajesh to talk about what he sees as being the findings from our 2024 key issues survey in terms of priorities for the market and what that means for behavior. Rajesh, what are your thoughts there?
No, thanks, Katrina. Thanks for setting it up. And again, good morning, evening, afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. So the key sentiment that we picked up is, enterprises, they want both. They want an and equation, right? Of course, they want to kind of drive the top line, but equally importantly, they're focusing on the bottom line as well, right? And to be able to kind of balance this out, they got to kind of figure out strategies that drive revenue growth, but through optimized effort and cost. And that's the place where, again, the other question that we asked is, hey, how do you plan to achieve that? What are the levers that you're going to prioritize to achieve this and equation, this goal? The ones that came out was not surprising, but if you want to peel that, you'll realize how these levers link to these dual objectives, right? The technology part of the equation will continue to be a theme that will go along in achieving both. So naturally, that's number one. Katrina mentioned the G part, but beyond the G part, Gen AI part, there are other considerations that are also going on in terms of technology modernization, upgrade. And to be able to honestly leverage Gen AI, what we have seen is, and organizations have realized, and they ought to, is there has to be a certain level of digital maturity, digital density to be in place, to be able to leverage that. Right? And that's the place where the technology modernization upgrade comes in addition to the Gen AI part of the equation. The data analytics and insights are typically geared towards driving more of top line, right? And again, organizations have invested meaningful dollar around it. They want to kind of not only continue to invest, but also operate it to get the insights as to make those decisions that can drive top line. And as they are doing it, of course, as we talked about, through optimized effort and cost, process optimization, operational efficiency addresses that part of the equation. So it's a kind of a combination of these levers that we are hearing enterprises wanting to leverage to achieve these twin objectives.
Thank you, Rajesh. So what I think that does is it actually leads to our next forecast very nicely. It's a nice segue there. So similar to 2023, while we're, there's this interest in using global services for both IT and business processes, it continues, but the growth of that overall space seems a bit muted. And the interesting thing is the focus of what area of global services we're interested in as a market is also sort of fluctuating. And so Alicia can you talk us through that and help us understand the nuances of that dynamic?
Sure, Katrina, thank you. So you're right, after a couple of flourishing years that the industry saw post-COVID, 2023 was sort of not the best of years that can be remembered for the industry. And unfortunately, the year 2024 seems to be going ahead on the similar lines, where enterprises' sentiment seems to indicate that their budgets for 24 for IT and business process isn't going to meaningfully change. It's going to remain either flat or increase only moderately. And what's also interesting is this increase moderate may also see a lot more tilt towards being spent with GBS centers as compared to service providers. So you'll see a very interesting chart on the next slide where we ask the enterprises on where do you expect to source the capabilities and where do you expect to be engaging more. A large proportion of enterprises seem to be tilting more towards the shared services, GBS, you may call it with different names, those centers as compared to their outsourcing service providers. And this number it gets more interesting as we think about it from different geography lenses and different industry lenses as well. I was looking at the numbers from APAC region and seems to be even more pronounced, where the APAC enterprises are, further more interested in the GBS setup as compared to outsourcing providers. And there can be, hundreds of reasons. We'll go into some of those eventually of why that shift is happening and what kind of work we see moving from one side to the other and so on and so forth. But what's really interesting is that there is a meaningful shift, and it's also going to have an impact on the kind of expectations they then have from the providers, from the GBS centers, and the way enterprises engage with any of these parties. Net of it, as we look at just the IT business process industry per se, forget about the GBS, just the IT services industry, as we think about what Rajesh said, on one side, enterprises will try to do more with less. They'll try to achieve a lot of objectives, growth, as well as cost optimization. But at the same time, the spend may get unequally split across what they do in-house or with GBS versus what they do with outsourcing service providers. There's some forecast that we have for the coming year in terms of what the industry growth may look like. And as we see on the next slide, the industry growth is going to be slightly muted, continue to be muted as it was in the year 2023. So our estimates for this calendar year, for the last calendar year rather, was around 2% overall industry growth. And for the coming year, it seems to be settling somewhere between 2.7 to 3.2% growth, with a slower pace, it going at a slower pace in the first half of the year and picking up in the second half of the year. So the second half of 24 is what we can expect to be bringing much more positive news and positive momentum from the enterprise side. The first half will continue largely on the lines of how we ended 2023. So that's what our forecast for the year 2024 for the year for the IT BP industry seems to be. It's going to be muted with a larger share of the pie going towards the GBS organizations.
So, Alicia, I can't help but ask this question. When you look at just the visual impact of what the trend has been over the last 4 or 5 years, right, with the pandemic and the shift in spending, there's this dramatic uptick in spending in 22, and now we have this transitional phase. You know, how do you think about that? Is this that we had demand that needs to be digested and executed that we're seeing articulated in lower growth rates, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so of course, in the year 21 and 22, this growth that we saw of very, very strong, almost double-digit numbers was primarily because of a lot of pent-up demand from the year 2020. However, as we enter 23, as you mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, right, that there was a lot of cautious sentiments that enterprises were entering in. So there were multitude of these engagements that were put on a back burner, that were discretionary spend that was not realized, and a lot of other initiatives that were just put on a hold. We expect some of that to start re-emerging, resurfacing as we think about 2024, specifically the second half of 24. Because if you think about it, enterprises cannot keep delaying some of those growth objectives indefinitely. What they're investing in, say from a cost optimization standpoint, is for now and here. Things that they invest in from a growth standpoint, building new channels or new digital capabilities, are for their long-term sustenance. They've already delayed it for almost a year, but we expect the year 2024 to be when they start rethinking about those and resurfacing some of those initiatives. And we expect to see some of those engagements start coming into the market all over again.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Let's move on to our third prediction, because I think there's a continuation of the conversation heading our way here. Rajesh talked about how companies are feeling the need to do more with less and are trying to be strategic in their spending. Alicia, you've talked about this shift in the focus of where the spending is happening and how that's going to play out. So what does this mean for the providers out in the marketplace? What does this mean for the partners and how enterprises are engaging with their partners? The prediction is that they're going to be kept on their toes. What does that mean? And Alicia, how do you see that impacting the nature of relationships in the marketplace?
Absolutely. So as we think about the service providers, coming back to the point on expectations from providers and why certain things are moving, will probably move away from service providers to GBS, and what is it that will move, and so on and so forth. Over the years, as we think about the market sentiments, we've been gathering a lot of inputs about the feedback and the satisfaction of enterprises. We have seen it to be either stagnant or declining over the past 3 to 4 years. And one of the consistent points of dissatisfaction that we've seen amongst enterprises has been around innovation. So that in specific, I believe, is a very important point that is going to drive a lot of engagement, is going to strengthen a lot of relationships between enterprises and their strategic partners. Essentially, those who can bring in innovative ideas, those who can push the envelope of innovation for enterprises, are the ones who will strengthen the relationships with enterprises. Some of the traditional expectations still remain amongst the top expectations. I mean, that's the foundation of the entire outsourcing industry. So, the services quality, productivity, delivery time, flexibility, all of these are amongst the top expectations and continue to be the top expectations. But what's interesting is if you see from 2023 to 24, the ranks of some of the other expectations have continued to increase. On the previous slide, if we see from the rank 7, innovation is now counted amongst the top 5 expectations from a service provider, supporting the various tools and technologies. And now with the adoption of generative AI in the coming years, it's going to even proliferate further, the kind of tools and technologies enterprises use. Service providers having that wide spectrum of support capabilities on all of those is another expectations. Overall, helping enterprises enhance their user experience, their customer experience, is the other expectation. So net of it, the envelope of expectation is only increasing. There is a lot more value realization that enterprises now expect from service providers, and they expect service providers to bring in some of those elements proactively to the engagement. What's going to happen because of all of this? Of course, there'll be some providers who will be better positioned to do this, some who may not get to that stage as quickly as it is needed for all of their customers, and so on and so forth. What we expect enterprises to do, and what enterprises indicate that they plan to do in the coming year, is a meaningful reshuffle of their provider portfolio. If we look at some of the very interesting statistics that we have on the next slide, almost 66% of enterprises say that they plan to make some changes to their service provider mix. The change could be either adding a new provider who's able to address all of these expectations that they have, or rebalancing the work amongst their existing service providers. But they're not going to go ahead with the provider base as is. They're going to relook at their entire portfolio of providers very, very carefully, scrutinize them and see where they're getting the right value, and if it requires some kind of reshuffle. And that's an exercise we expect 66% of enterprises, 2 in every 3 enterprise, to do in the year 2024. And that's a huge number, and this number has only been increasing. We've been gathering this data for quite some time now, and we see this number only increasing because they're seeing, as they reshuffle, they rebalance the work, they tend to derive a lot more value. They tend to derive a lot more ROI from these relationships with the service providers.
So, Alicia, I think part of that is also related to our next topic, which is around bill rates. So we're expecting that in 2024, overall billing rates will remain flat. And in a way that ties closely to this concept of how do enterprise clients derive value. This is one element of that. So Rajesh, I think you're close to this area of our coverage. When you look at bill rates, can you tell us more about how that might be shifting and what's driving that shift?
Oh, absolutely. So if you go to the next slide, again, realize just a kind of little bit of context, right? If you look at 2023, actually the bill rate increased 2 to 4%, right? In 2022, again, it kind of went up. And the context, which Katrina was mentioning earlier, is important to understand within which some of these things happened, right? We have had the talent war, we have had high inflation. Honestly, in some of the places, the demand was pretty high and so on and so forth, right? But going into 2024, as Alicia was mentioning, setting it up, some of those things have eased. In fact, through the same research study, we saw that talent as a key challenge has deprioritized from number 3 in 2023 to they're expecting it to be number 7 relative order of challenge. So within that context, the bill rate increase is difficult. Having said that, again, the devil lies in detail. There are certain areas where the demand continues to be high. The skill availability continues to be a challenge, and then there are areas where there's abundance of possibly the supply, not enough demand. So again, if you peel the onion, things will differ, but on an aggregate basis, we expect this to remain flat in 2024 based on what we are picking up from enterprises and all the work that we are doing with a lot of them as well.
Okay. So the question that comes to mind, though, is, how will bill rates be affected by our next topic? So the next topic is, in terms of prediction, is generative AI, right? And we know that generative AI has a direct impact to issues of productivity, to issues of cost. And so, Alicia, I think what I've heard you talk about in the past is how, while there's a lot of interest in understanding what generative AI could bring to an organization, there's a bit of caution out in the marketplace in terms of how it'll be adopted and in what context and so forth. Can you take us through that part of the conversation? What does it look like today as we're starting 2024?
Sure, Katrina. And finally, we're talking about the most talked topic of the year, generative AI. So you're right, while there is meaningful confidence, interest, everything, and enterprises are, asking about it, every conversation that we do is sort of incomplete without talking about generative AI. It's actually counted amongst the top 5 technologies that enterprises are going to be spending on, with cloud, with automation, with security. It's counted amongst the top 5 technologies. However, as you said, there are only about 1 in 4 enterprises that are expected to go all out with Gen AI adoption in terms of adopting it at scale and adopting it, full on within their enterprise's context. Most of the others are going to be staying at a POC or a pilot stage or exploring, understanding what generative AI means for their organization. As we think about this from a functional standpoint, we expect the IT function, customer service, and sales and marketing, these 3 to be the ones where most of this adoption and pilot and POC implementations really happen. Now, as you asked, right, what's the reason for this muted adoption? While there are many, the key reason that we have seen enterprises sit at the fence and not jump right in when it comes to generative AI has largely been more intrinsic to them about, say, organizational readiness. Am I ready to adopt a transformative technology like generative AI? Because while it is transformative, it can lead to a lot of potential benefits. At the same time, there is tremendous amount of groundwork that needs to be done by an organization to be able to implement it. It requires tremendous amount of digital maturity in terms of the data estates, in terms of security posture, in terms of having the right governance in place, what can be used, what cannot be used, what can be, how the information or the outputs from generative AI can be used. It may land enterprises into real serious troubles if the entire adoption isn't governed or isn't thought through. From a security standpoint, it could be massive issue. So these are all the various concerns that enterprises perceive and they already are aware of. And they need consultative support from service providers to be able to navigate all of these challenges. So there are 2 parts of the problem, right? One is more intrinsic, as I talked about. It's all about, am I ready for this entire transformation? The other is where and how to start. Both of these part of the questions is what they're really struggling to answer, because there is no function, there is no process out there that cannot be impacted with generative AI. But the question really is, what makes the most sense? What is it that is the right thing for enterprises to do to begin such a big transformation, and what should be that roadmap for the transformation? So all of those are questions that enterprises are trying to solve for. And that's the whole reason why we see and we hear enterprises think about generative AI for 2024, but largely in terms of conducting pilots or exploring the use cases and testing the feasibility and the ROI from it.
Well, we're going to be talking a little bit more about generative AI as we move forward, especially in relation to how analyst relations folks should be thinking about it. So we'll come back to this topic in the course of our conversations. So this is kind of where we pivot from the market overall to talking about what analyst relations teams and leaders should be thinking about or may find helpful to be thinking about. But before we jump into that section, on the next slide, I wanted to let you know that, for joining us today, we want to thank you for being part of our audience and to offer you something that might be relevant to your day-to-day reality in terms of working with your stakeholders. And so we have a complimentary excerpt from our deal data. It's the Everest Group Market Intelligence Deals Database. And we are offering you the opportunity to choose an excerpt of data on a set of deals. 200 to 300 active market deals would be included in that excerpt. And they will either focus on IT services and digital, meaning the technology, the digital component, and the digital deals out there, or it'll be on business process services. And again, a set of technology and digital deals. So you can choose between one or the other, depending on your interest. And all the relevant information about those deals will be part of the readout that you're going to receive. So what's covered in those deals? What's the TCV? What's the the terms of the deal? What kinds of, who's the client organization? What kind of provider organizations are involved? The locations for delivery and the models for delivery, the geography of the buying organization, all these kinds of things that I think will be very valuable for you to have in hand to take back to your relevant business leaders and revenue generation leaders to say, hey, we're starting the new year. Let's see how this is relevant to our goals or our clients and the kinds of things we're trying to accomplish in the marketplace. And so you will receive a link where you can click to express your interest. You may also receive an email post the event where you can also express that interest. And we hope you find it very useful to sort of bring something of value short-term into your organization and prompt some meaningful conversation. So that's our thank you to you for joining us today. But with that, let's move on to the kind of 4 key strategies that I think came to me as I was going through these predictions that were shared about the market and thinking, what does that mean for an AR team member? And so these are 4 things that I think are fairly actionable. We'll go through them and can drive value for your organization. For one of them is in this sort of solid, but maybe not super exciting year ahead of us from a growth standpoint, it's really important for AR teams to be creative and to bring sort of targeted solutions that will enable them to link the research that they have access to the revenue generation and competitive goals of their organization. So we'll talk about that a little bit. The other is, if the GBS market opportunity, as we've been talking about, is increasing as a share of the overall opportunity out there, how does your organization take its resources, take its offerings, and make it relevant to that particular subset of the audience in the enterprise space? So we'll cover that as well. We talked about bill rates. And so what are strategies around billing and pricing, and how can AR bring value in that regard? And then the last one is getting back to the topic of generative AI. How does the research that we have in the marketplace, how do we make that relevant to the specific deals that are out there that are happening today? How do we think about building those relationships with the clients that are grappling with generative AI? What role can service providers play? And how can analyst relations help support those efforts? So with that, let's move on to the first slide. Now, we did a whole LinkedIn Live back on November 30th on this topic of how can analyst relations support the sales and revenue generation goals of their company. So this content may look familiar to some of you that joined us there. But what I wanted to share here is, first of all, from an overarching standpoint, I know a lot of analyst relations people ask, what are metrics that they should be measured by in terms of sales? How do they support the sales organization? I think analyst relations folks need to help shape the nature of that conversation with their organization. I feel very strongly that AR people are sometimes held accountable for something in a way that is not well aligned with their skill sets and their mission in the organization. Analysts, relations professionals are generally not hired from sales organizations. They're hired because they are interested in information, in strategy, and in helping move big picture things forward. And so I'd like to shape the conversation to say, as an analyst relations team, how do you make your organization overall better prepared and better informed to compete in the market and thereby win more deals? So it's about creating the environment that allows your teams to be effective from a sales and revenue generation standpoint. And so if we look at this more narrowly, the things that you can bring to the table with the research that you have access to and your knowledge of the information that's available are things like the fact that, it's not only about those assessments and where you are on the peak matrix or anybody's assessment for that matter. There's a lot of good stuff. I call it, where the other good stuff is in the other components of the memberships that I have experienced as an analyst. And I know my colleagues have as well, that are underutilized a lot of times, that are already things that you have access to, and having knowledge about what those are, and then pushing those out to the organizations because you're aware of what they're grappling with at a given time can drive a lot of value from something you're already invested in. So whether it's inquiries or strategy sessions or gap analysis, I mean, a lot of times sales and revenue generation people do not think about coming to AR for that. And here's an opportunity that's ready to be matched with the information that you have access to. The information that you have access to as an AR person, as a technology or a service provider, that same information is leveraged by our enterprise clients as well. And so why not leverage the information your target, our mutual clients, your target enterprise clients have, and bring that into your organization? So you're working off of the same information that they are. And is that propagated into the thought process of sales and revenue generation leads and business, line of business leads? So that's another thought, is aligning what you understand of the market with what the enterprises are hearing and understanding about the market. We all know about custom engagements. I think, everybody sometimes shies away from them because they think of the process of engagement. But in reality, if you want to contextualize the research and the information to the very specifics of your organizations, those bespoke projects can drive a lot of value, and the ROI on those can be quite high compared to the outcomes that you can drive for your business. So whether it's the competitive differentiation, the market opportunity identification, bid reviews, you've got a bid out there. Do you need it reviewed before you take it to market with a particular enterprise? These are areas where the tools are available, and can we get them into the organization in a way that helps them drive value? Something to keep in mind, numbers talk. So in my experience, and I'm going to ask Alicia and Rajesh to kind of chime in on these last two, especially. Numbers talk. And we all know that our sales executives, our line of business executives are deeply entrenched with a set of particular clients, and they know those clients well. But oftentimes that depth means that they don't see the breadth of the marketplace. And maybe there's stuff outside their peripheral vision that they don't see as clearly as they need to. And by bringing them numbers based on a wider view of the marketplace can calibrate what they think about a given situation with a given client, or help them plan out larger term strategies for the marketplace as a whole. So that point of bringing actual numbers to your colleagues through the research is a nuance that I think, I know some AR people try to advocate this and they work hard to get it out. Other times I'm not sure that that connection is made that easily. And so wanted to remind us that matters. And then lastly, I don't know how this works elsewhere, but at Everest Group, we encourage you to bring your business leaders, your sales leaders, your marketing leaders, your strategy leaders to inquiries. We have no constraints on how many people attend an inquiry or what role they play in your organization. And sometimes the reason this matters is that sometimes if you have that line of business leader in a conversation with somebody like Rajesh or Alicia, the conversation goes in a direction that wasn't anticipated, and they get to explore what they're seeing in the marketplace and hearing a reality check and a thought partner being brought into the conversation. So keep in mind that briefings and inquiries are something that you can bring to your business and sales executives for them to have these kinds of thought-provoking conversations. So these are all areas where we think that AR can create an environment that strengthens the overall competitiveness of their organization beyond the scope of an individual deal. So Rajesh, I know you've talked about this a lot. You and I have talked about this a lot over the years. Any thoughts that you want to add to this part of the conversation?
I'll just build on to what you mentioned, you laid out, Katrina. And the phrase that comes to my mind is missing the woods for the trees, right? Especially the last but one point that you were making, right? A lot of times, as you're mentioning, we have seen people, especially on the business side, so very focused on what they need to do, they miss out on the the market shift that is already happening and recognize that shift, right? So, for example, and again, it may come across as, hey, we are kind of, but some of you probably who engaged with us or basically, use some of our research that time, 5 years back or 6 years back, we said, and Katrina, you were part of it, right? We said, hey, digital CX is going to be a big opportunity, right? And when everyone was saying, hey, contact center is dead, right? And again, we said, hey, you ought to kind of look at it differently, right? So the opportunity it's a great opportunity for AR, because at one level, I can be a channel, other level, I can be both a channel and a door opener to the possibilities, and we are there to kind of provide that help, right? So again, there's a lot of opportunities to create the value for your stakeholders, and we are here to kind of help that. And again, different organizations, different constructs, but at the end of the day, as we talked about, we said, hey, enterprise is looking to drive top line. I think everyone, be it provider, whatever, everyone, all of us is trying to kind of drive the top line, create the right impact. And it's all about getting access to the right information. I mean, I would say information is, I may come across as, I would say information is a commodity. What we see both enterprise side and provider side executives are seeking is contextualized insights that can increase their conviction to make certain decisions, or or help them understand the possibility, the big potential possibility, so that they can put action against it. Again, AR is uniquely positioned to help, their stakeholders meet those objectives.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rajesh. Sort of segues into the next point. If we can have the next slide, thank you. So we talked about the opportunity kind of migrating a little bit, at least for 2024, in the direction of in-house global business centers. And we wanted to say or ask the question of, how do the people who lead these centers create capacity and further the mission of their organization? And what does that mean for a provider of technology or services? And so if you think about it, they unlock the value from the things that are listed here on the left-hand side, right? The kinds of services they take on, the kinds of technology they implement, the skills and the experience that they bring, and the metrics and the measurements that they're held accountable for. And then to implement, how do they accomplish that? They have to have the right kind of talent management strategies. They have to have the right kind of change management strategies. They have to have the right kind of supplier management capabilities and so forth. So how is this different than other scenarios within the enterprise? How are these in-house centers what do they need that's different, right? And I do know that there is a difference. We actually have a practice that looks at in-house centers compared to outsource relationships, for example. And so I wanted to ask Alicia, as we think about the providers that we have on the line today, and maybe they are already doing work with GBS, maybe they're not, maybe they have a small practice and now has the opportunity to grow it. How do we, what do they need to know? And as we think about analyst relations folks who have access to research, how can they play a role in propagating that for their internal stakeholders to say, hey, this is something you should be thinking about. It might be a little different than the way we've looked at the opportunity in the past. You know, what do we need to let them know about?
Yeah, sure. And that's a very interesting question, Katrina, considering the fact I talked about enterprises expecting to rebalance their work across different providers and across GBS versus service providers. So when it comes to service providers, is that really a net loss? I don't think so, because even if for an enterprise, they are outsourcing to a provider or outsourcing to a GBS center, there is a lot of opportunities for a provider to work with those GBS centers to make sure the final value gets delivered to the enterprise. And that's what we are seeing as one of the key areas that a lot of service providers focus on. The GBS organization sort of becomes a set of key targets and a set of, a different market segment that they are looking at. Now, coming to your question, how does that market segment differ from the enterprise market segment? I think there are quite a few differences. We've been part of a lot of these live deals wherein enterprises are trying to identify who they should be working with, who has the better capabilities, and it includes some of their GBS centers in addition to the outsourcing providers. So in a way, the GBS centers are fighting for the same share of the pie. They need to be competent. They need to be competitive. All of these requires insights. All of these requires support and learnings, which service providers are at a very good position to provide because they've been doing this since ages and at a massive scale. Therefore, for the service providers, it becomes a great opportunity to work with GBS centers to help them from their people strategy standpoint, to help them from process standpoint or from technology standpoint, to understand the best practices, to understand what are the best-in-class techniques and technologies these GBS centers should be adopting and working on for their enterprise clients to be able to deliver the right value. Now, when we think about the value in itself, this value proposition from a service provider to an enterprise versus a GBS center will also therefore be different. It would be more around what kind of automation capabilities they can bring in. It may not be an end-to-end service support naturally because they're not directly working with an enterprise, but say in a T&M fashion, in a fixed contract based fashion, in terms of how can they come in to optimize certain processes, to optimize the cost. How can they, in a way, help the GBS center expand the business with the enterprise by operating model, by changes in their operating model such that they are more suitable to provide the value. So those are some of the things that I believe are great value levers for service providers to explore and work with GBS leaders on.
Okay, excellent. I think the one other thing we can mention here is, these GBS centers are as interested in generative AI implementations. They implement technology and they want to be efficient and productive and intelligent as anybody else. And so, let's not forget, and that, correct me if I'm wrong here, Alicia, but let's not forget that these are operational centers that in this model is interested in everything that anybody else is interested in around generative AI. So they're a target audience for that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
No,
great.
absolutely. Actually, if I were to just kind of add to this, we believe that the entire shared services GBS is the lab where the Gen AI is going to get played, right? See, there's a fundamental difference between cloud and Gen AI in terms of where it is going to get consumed and where the demand is going to come from, right? Cloud was largely on the IT wheelhouse on the infrastructure side. Gen AI, again, more of technology, but in terms of the application and the and really getting that demand equation. Business is going to come in, a lot of the GBS organizations come in. So what I see is for service provider, again, there's a lot of opportunity. I think, Alicia, you were kind of alluding to that as well. There's a lot of opportunity to kind of figure out how can we, serve the GBS organization itself, achieve some of those objectives. May not come from a typical outsourcing angle, and there are very interesting set of models that are coming into play, wherein we can participate as a provider and capture and basically co-create value for the GBS enterprise and ourselves.
Okay, very good. I'm just noticing the time, so I do want to move on to the last of our 4 points for AR, or this is the third, sorry, of our AR points. So this whole topic of billing rates, right? It can seem a little scary at first, but if you have the power of knowledge and insight, it may be not as scary to navigate as it feels at first blush. This theme of contextualization is very relevant for billing areas. And there's different ways to think about billing. It's not just what are the rates today in the marketplace, and I want a database where I can look up roles and geographies and come up with bill rates. We do offer that. We do see a role for that, and it's something that some of you may find useful. Kind of the ongoing element of what happens with billing, just to have that information available. But one of the things that I think are relevant that many people don't know can be helpful or don't have the opportunity to access is sort of more deal-driven review of billing in a very contextualized space. So whether you have an existing client engagement or you're in the process of proposing a client engagement, you can actually take a look at how well the proposed pricing aligns with the realities of that client's geography, that client's engagement, the component, how well are you aligned with the proposed solution elements, the contract terms, the metrics, and so forth, and to get a real-time contextualized evaluation that could fundamentally change how competitive and how compelling the pricing in your proposal is. And we've had cases where the client has come to us because they are trying to prepare for a renewal with their provider. We've seen cases where the provider has come to us to say, I want to be on track before I propose this to my client. And then times when they come to us together as part of an exercise. So that's really powerful to say, hey, I'm confident that my pricing is really well, and my metrics and my service agreements and all kinds of things are contextualized to what you need as a client. So that's very situational. It's a very deal-driven way of looking at bill rates. But then ongoing, there's this whole element of competitive positioning, whether you're a service company or a software company. How well are your overall framework for pricing aligned with where the market's going? Having to do with your pricing models, having to do with your licensing models, having to do with the benchmarks and the performance metrics. So there's 3 layers, right? There's the overall knowledge about the market. There's tackling the realities of an individual deal and being able to create change and drive value there. And then there's how well am I positioned overall as a firm in the marketplace? Am I even invited to the table because I've got the right formula, or I'm not? And this is all relevant because the small investment that's made in adjusting pricing, we find, creates a huge ROI down the road. And the ability to compete in the right way on a level playing field because your deals are structured properly is huge. Rajesh, Alicia, I'm not sure which of you would want to tackle that one, but just some quick thoughts on how to think about pricing in your experience.
Yeah, no, I think Katrina, you pretty much answered it, and especially in 2024, as we talked about it, right? It is a very important factor based on what we are seeing in the marketplace, part of our research, part of our work with enterprises. And, it is about the FTE rate card sometimes and what have you, but a lot of times much more, needs to be kind of thought through in a much more holistic manner. And the way to kind of construct some of those things are important. I mean, one of the questions was around that I responded is, hey, what is where the expectation from provider is going down or something like that. Everything is going up, it seems, right? So I mean, that's the reality, right? What is again going, well, it's going up or down, I don't know. But for example, if you think about the transformation and transformative solution, unless we create a right commercial model to go with it, right commercial model meaning the transformative solution needs to provide positive ROI, positive business case in the first year itself, it's unlikely to get a green signal, right? Our organization's not going to wait for 2-3 years to realize the benefit. So whether it's a competitive situation, sole source situation, how do we kind of architect that becomes very, very important in the current environment.
Yeah, thank you. And not last but not least is a view on the generative AI piece. So as you've seen, as you've heard, on our next slide, we articulate again this concept of the context of what's happening. So generative AI, as we've heard, everybody's interested in, but what we have found is that it's very important to understand where the client is and to bring very targeted knowledge to the discussion with the client to start with. So I'm sorry if this seems a little small, but you will see the replay, and so you can delve into it a little bit more deeply or expand it when it's on your monitor. But what we've done here is we're trying to communicate the message that you need to look at not only the vertical industry that's involved. In this case, we have some examples of research we've done around banking and financial services. And not only do you need to look at that vertical, you need to look at it from the standpoint of what are the use cases. And these are captured here on the left chart, on the left side column of the use cases that a banking and financial services entity might have. And then we look at it, are they engaging in pilot work or are they engaging in production level work, right? Where are they in their maturity and adoption? And so we've looked at who are the technology providers. In this case, they're articulated here along the blue dots that are working with banking and financial services providers in these use cases, and how are they building out actual solutions, and where are they in that maturity model? So it's at multiple levels of detail that matter. And if we look at the chart on the right, what we're trying to say here is that, okay, again, from pilot to production in a commercial banking scenario with different kinds of functionality, what is the level of maturity of different financial institutions, and they're listed here, you can see, in terms of their adoption. And as you can see, the clustering is somewhere between pilot and sort of mid-range proof of concept and so forth. Very few have actually gotten into production so far as of the end of 23. We do have a whole section on our reports portal where all of our generative AI research is available, or at least is shown, and you can access that through the link here on the page. But the message I'm trying to drive here is that helping your organizations as AR professionals access the information they need at this level of detail is very important, and getting them to realize that this is the level of nuance they need to go to when they are planning their go-to-market strategies is very important. So with that, hopefully we answered a lot of the questions that came in earlier, as well as some of the ones that have been coming in while we're talking. So thank you very much for those. We will follow up to answer those questions that we didn't get to, or you can reach out to us if you're still interested in something we haven't covered. Reminding you that there's our deals database excerpt that's available to you. So please remember to take a look at that and follow up. And with that, I'd like to thank my co-panelists, Alicia Mittal and Rajesh Ranjan. I wish you luck for 2024. And I'm going to wrap up here. Take care. Bye-bye.